In our second video of Lecture 4A, we're going to talk about how we can format our output using something called printf. So the benefit to this is you can use format specifiers to format your string print output. It's more concise than concatenation when you have multiple string literals and variables to display, but you can also use it to format your output to make it look like you've rounded your decimal values to any number of decimal places. And later on we'll learn how we can use string.format to do it. Unfortunately, the syntax is a little bit different than a traditional print or print line statement, but the more you practice it, the easier it'll get. So let's look what's happening here. So this one is not using printf, it's just using traditional print line statements. So when I run this program, you'll notice I have three variable values. Num is an int, x is a double. Remember, it's technically being assigned 15.0, and then I'm creating a double that is calculated by taking num, which is 13, and dividing it by x, which is 15.0. And so here I am displaying three print line statements. In the first one, I'm saying num is, and then I'm concatenating with it the value of num, which was 13. So that's why down here it says num is 13. And the second print line statement, I'm saying x is, and then I'm concatenating with it the value of x, which is 15.0. And then the third one, this one is kind of like faking the appearance of a division problem, even though the division was actually done in line 6. And so it's saying 13, and then a string literal for / to represent divided by x, and then we're putting in an equals, and then the quotient. So that's all well and good, but we may not always want our output to look like this. Okay, so I'm going to show you how we can use printf instead. So printf is a way of formatting it, and it's not challenging, it's just different. So to use printf, you replace after print, you put the letter f. Now if you're in a print statement or a print line statement, you still put it at the end of there. Now what you're going to do is we're not going to concatenate num. Instead, we're going to think about what would go here if we were to format it. Okay, and I want num is to be the value of num. So we have a very specific format specifier used for an integer value, and that format specifier is this little % symbol and d. Now what that does is it's going to format an integer value, which seems silly because it says d. And then instead of concatenating num, I'm going to put a comma and then say num. And the reason I'm putting a comma is just that's the syntax of it. And here this num corresponds to this. So basically it's going to substitute the value here, but it's going to format it while it substitutes. Now notice this is a printf statement, it's not a print line statement. So I'm going to have to put a new line at the end to make sure that anything after this goes on to a new line. Now if I were to, I'm going to comment out these for right now. If I were to compile this and run it, you're going to say that doesn't look very different. And I'm going to say you're right, and it's not going to look different right now. Let's move on to our next print line statement. So I want to format this, and I'm going to change this to say printf. Now I want to format x, but x is a double. And so in here, where I'm going to say x is something, I'm going to say that it's going to be %f, and f stands for a floating value. Okay? And then I'm going to put my new line character to make sure it moves to a new line. And then instead of concatenating my variable, I'm just going to put the comma there. Why? It's just the syntax rules. Okay, so then I compile it, and then I run it, and you'll notice, oh, now it's not saying 15.0, it's saying 15.6 zeros. Now what if I don't want that to be the case? Well, here I can format this to tell how many decimal places I want. So I can say 0.1, and that would give 1 decimal place. Notice it goes between the % sign and the f, and so it'll do that. I could change this to a 0.2, and it will give me 2 decimal places. Alright, So I'll just keep it with 1 right now. Okay, so when we have an integer value, we use %d, and then it's looking to see what variable corresponds to it. So it's important that if I'm using %d as my format specifier, it really does refer to an integer variable. If I say %f, whether or not I have anything in between it, it's important that that specifies to a double value, which it does. And then I can also use printf to format a statement with multiple variables. So I'm going to change that to an f. And so I'm going to, actually I'm going to leave this alone, and I'm just going to make a new one. Alright, so I'm going to say system.out.printf, and I wanted my output to say something divided by something equals something, right? And so what are those somethings? Let's figure out what should go in there. Well, I want to say that my num. Now my num is an integer value. So in the first blank, I'm going to put %d. Why? Because that's just how it works. And then, actually I forgot my new line character. That's okay. And then here after my comma, I'm going to put the variable that it corresponds to. So this corresponds to the first variable after my comma list. Alright, and then I want to say divided by my x value. And so my x is a double value, so I'm going to say %f, but I want it formatted to 1 decimal place, so I'm going to put 0.1. And then after num, I'm going to add to that list with a comma and say x. Okay, and then I want it to equal my quotient, and my quotient is a double, so I'm going to say %. And this one I'm going to just say 2 decimal places. And then so here at the end of my list, I'm going to have it associate with quotient. So the way this works is with your format specifier, the first format specifier corresponds to the first variable in your list after your comma, after your string literal. And then your second specifier corresponds with the second variable, and the third one specifies with, or corresponds to the third. So it is important that you make sure that the data types match up to what you're saying it's going to be. Okay, so let's see how this looks different. And you'll notice that this one is going to format this as an int, this as a decimal, but then here this one looks like it rounded for us. Now it's not technically rounding it, it's just rounding the appearance of the output. If I uncomment that one, you'll still see that it's hasn't changed, but the format of it has changed. Now there's another useful thing. Let's say that num was really long, like that. You'll notice that when I display num, it doesn't put commas in for us. And so one thing we can do is after the %sign, I can put a comma there. And when I do that, when it formats it, and it's only going to format it for the first one because that's the only one that I said, you'll notice that it'll put the commas in appropriately. Now, why did it not do it here? Because I didn't tell it to do it here. So I could also tell it to format my integer there. Okay, and you'll notice it does that. And it works the same with decimal values. I would just put it after the % symbol before I put my 0.1 or 0.2 or whatever, and I could do it there, and it would format that as well. So if having commas in your output is something important, it is possible to format it that way. So this is the syntax. It takes a little bit getting used to, but it's not unreasonable. It's just instead of concatenating, you have to think about what do I want my literal to be, and then think of it as like fill in the blanks, and it's going to look to see what variable it fills in the blank with. And so it's just a different syntax rule. Now your computer's only going to acknowledge this if you have printf. If I had kept this print line, I would get a compiler error because it's going to say it does not make sense that way. So it's important that you do say printf. And again, that's why we have this, is to make sure we move on to a new line. So it takes some getting used to, but try this out. Try different things. Assign different values. See how it works. The worst that can happen is it doesn't compile for you.